Welcome to the PR Maven podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. The PR Maven, and I have been working in PR throughout my very long career, and I have a special interest in personal branding. That's what makes you stand out from everyone else who does the same thing you do, and it acts kind of like a magnet. It attracts the right people into your sphere, and in a way, it actually even repels the people who don't belong there. So personal branding is a really It's a great thing to learn about, and we like to talk about it on this podcast. I'm also a keynote speaker, an author, and a columnist for the Forbes Agency Council and Main Biz. And my audiences have said that helping them think about their superpower has changed the way they think about their careers and their lives. And I hope you like this episode, and I hope you'll share it with people who might be interested in hearing it. And today's episode is powered by Pitchcraft, and you'll hear more about Pitchcraft about halfway through the show. But first, with me today is our guest, Tangia Al-awaji Estrada, who's a PR and brand strategist and podcast pro. Welcome to the PR Maven podcast, Tangia.
Thanks so much for having me, Nancy. Excited to be here.
Yes, it's nice to have you. And you're in Denver, Colorado, the Mile High City.
I am.
That's awesome. So Tangia Al-awaji Estrada is a dynamic PR and brand strategist and international public speaker with a passion for storytelling and community building. As the co-founder of BIPOC Podcast Creators, Tangia is committed to elevating diverse voices and sharing stories that matter. With a background in community organizing, media relations, public policy, and campaigning, Tangia brings a unique perspective to her work as a PR professional. She understands the power of storytelling to shape perceptions, build brand awareness, and create meaningful connections with audiences. Tangia is a natural leader and mentor, and her passion for empowering others is evident in everything she does. She has a talent for building relationships and creating collaborative partnerships. And she's committed to creating opportunities for underrepresented communities in the media and PR industries. Tangia is also the creator of That's What She Did podcast, a show that amplifies the voices of brilliant women. So I want to hear more about that. But first, Tangia, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
Like most things in life, I stumbled into it. That's just how my life works. I think I'm going one way and then I find myself doing something else. I came into it having no idea about anything related to public relations or marketing or branding. I started in politics. That's what my undergrad degree is in, political science. When I was still an undergrad on college campuses, I started volunteering for some nonprofits that were doing community building work. I didn't know the name for that work at the time was community organizing. And I didn't know that the things that I had was charged to do at that time were media relations and public relations and building campaigns. I just thought it was a great cause. And I was having a good time, and I was learning and enjoying what I was doing. From there, I did end up going into politics after I graduated. And I worked for several nonprofits around public policy. I did more community organizing. I did political campaigning. I always ended up being the de facto media relations PR person on every campaign that I worked on, because I was the one that had the most experience. And when you come out of college, and you get your first job and you're like 22 or whatever, nobody else really has that experience unless they specifically interned at a public relations firm or something. And not a lot of those folks were going into campaigning. They were going to work for PR firms, or they were going into marketing. So I found that I had this skill set that most of the people around me didn't have, and it made me indispensable. It helped that I also enjoyed it. It helped that I actually like to build relationships with people and sit down and talk to them and get to know them and figure out ways to collaborate. And so it really built from there. I went on to do bigger campaigns, work for bigger nonprofits, eventually co-founded a public policy nonprofit with some colleagues. Eventually, I got burned out on nonprofit work and campaigning altogether. So I left and I went corporate for a while, and still ended up being the de facto PR person. And learned really through my corporate experience about how to bring public relations and business building together, and how they are so important in building an overall cohesive brand and making them work together so that you can build a business that has the ability to grow, that can find the correct audience and find the correct customer and connect with them on a meaningful level. So I did that for a while, and now here we are. Several years, like really I pivoted like a lot of people did during the pandemic. I had been offered a job with a large company, in mostly focusing on media and public relations, and then we went into lockdown. And at that time, it was March in Denver when they went into lockdown, and at that time they were telling us it was going to be 2 weeks, and so we waited the 2 weeks. And then the 2 weeks happened, and then they were like, well, it's going to be like probably like 3 weeks. And then we waited the 3 weeks, and then basically the mayor and the governor were like, well, we don't actually know. And then the next day I got an email from the company rescinding the offer. And I was like, okay, so I need to pivot. I didn't really know what I needed to do. And I just started freelancing, and then did that for like a year. And I was like, I don't know why I'm freelancing. I don't know why I just don't found an agency. And so that's what I did. And here we are.
So the pandemic really had a profound impact on your career.
It did. Like so many people, I mean, I don't know where I would have ended up. It was a really great company. I was excited to go work for them. But I think in the end, I was probably always driving towards this. I find that I'm not a very good employee. I'm not very good at taking orders. I'm really good at delegating, right? Which is a nice way of saying. So a nice way of saying is I'm bossy, and I like to call myself a professional scene causer. And I think that's perfect alignment with being in public relations and branding, and going off on my own and doing my own thing.
Yes. So essentially, your background in community organizing, public policy, and campaigning led to the PR profession.
It did. It did. And at that, again, at that time, I was so young when I started out. I had no idea that PR was a thing. I didn't know that there were PR agencies. Those were words that no one had ever said to me. I just, sometimes if you just follow your talents, you end up in places that you never dreamed of.
Exactly. You and I have a lot in common. So, how can you build relationships with media professionals without being a nuisance?
I think first off, you need to remember that you're dealing with an actual person. And what I see a lot of folks doing, particularly if they're a business owner or a community leader of some kind and they're trying to DIY it because they don't have the budget to hire somebody, is they forget that being transactional, that leading with a transaction of some kind, is the opposite way to build a good relationship with somebody. When you're dealing with an actual person, nobody wants to feel like a transaction. None of us want to feel like a nameless number. We want to know that somebody, even if we don't know them, at least has a little bit of care and concern, like has enough courtesy to learn our name and spell it correctly and ask us how our day was and those kinds of things. That those matter in human relations. And so I would say the first thing is you have to remember that you are dealing with an actual person who has an actual life, and they're dealing with all of the same things that you're dealing with in your life, and you don't know what kind of day that you're having. So if the first contact you have with them is, what can you do for me? It's not going to go well. It leaves a bad taste in that person's mouth, just like it would leave a bad taste in your mouth. So I would say start there and really think through, spend the time to think through, how can I help this person in some way? How can I support the work that they're doing? What does it actually look like to be friendly to a complete stranger? And if you lead with that, you're doing far better than probably 70, 80% of the people out there who are sending emails or walking up to folks in a networking thing and just being rude.
It's so true. I mean, you have your own podcast just like I do, and you probably get tons of emails where people try to act like they've listened to your podcast, but they really haven't. They're like, oh, I'm a big fan of the PR Maven podcast. And then they just go into their question, wanting to be on the podcast or get one of their clients
or they don't
on.
bother with even some kind of fake platitude. It's more like, this is why I'm great and why you need to interview me or why you should care. And it's just like, why are you wasting my time?
Exactly. I know. So why might PR efforts be ineffective with multicultural communities, and how can focusing on relationships improve this?
Well, this is one of the areas that I focus on in my work is, as you said at the top, I'm very passionate about elevating the voices of multicultural communities in everything that I do. And part of that is because I'm part of those communities, and I've seen public relations and marketing efforts fail miserably because of, frankly, stupidity and laziness. And it becomes frustrating after a while. One of the things that I see, happen quite often with companies, that there may be people within that organization that genuinely care and want to do a good job. And somehow that gets lost in the mix of corporate life, right? And one of the ways that gets lost is we will see a company that is like, we're going to do this initiative, we're going to do this campaign, and they will do it on a very, very small scale than they would have done for anybody else. And that comes through in a couple of different ways. The biggest example is going to be the holidays, right? So like African American History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Indigenous Heritage Month, Pride, Women's History, whatever the thing is, whatever identity they've just month or day is time to celebrate, they will only do a very small thing around that particular holiday. And they're like, look at us being inclusive, and that's great. And it's like, well, that's nice, I guess. I mean, sure, okay. Thank you for like the mug.
Yeah, right.
I could use another mug, right? But the community that you're trying to build a relationship with, what they actually are experiencing is exclusion the other 11 months out of the year. And the company thinks, oh, we've done this really great thing in March for Women's History Month, when in reality, you've excluded them all of the other months of the year. And if you want to have a relationship with anybody, you have to maintain the relationship.
Right.
If I want to have a good relationship with my next door neighbor, I need to say hello to them throughout the year. I need to say, hi, how are you? Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. All year long, I don't have to go give them a hug every day, right? I don't need to invite them over to my birthday party, but I do need to acknowledge them and be friendly and be a good neighbor with whatever is within my capacity all of the months of the year. Not just this is we're celebrating Neighbor Week in May. And so only during that week of May do I acknowledge the presence of my neighbors or smile at them or be friendly. It's a little thing that you have to do, is remember that people exist during the times of the year that you don't actually need them for anything.
Right. Yes, exactly.
I don't need my neighbor every day. Right. And journalists are treated the same way.
Right? Yeah. So what are best practices for cultivating and maintaining authentic and productive relationships that go beyond shallow transactions?
Get to know the folks that you're actually trying to reach. Find out something about them. Again, it's existing on that human level, existing outside of your corporate sphere, existing outside of your job. Who is this person? Who is this community? What matters to them? What is the nuance? I think a big thing is recognizing the nuance of every community that you want to work with. So there's a certain nuance to being a over 50 woman in America who's still working and not planning on retiring anytime soon, right? There's a nuance to being a Black woman in America who is just starting off in her career. There's a nuance to being any type of identity that you are. And so if you have said, Pride Month is really important to us, if you have said the LGBTQ plus community is really important to us, then the onus is on you to learn the nuance of that community. And the way that you do that is you have to reach out and you have to build a relationship and you have to ask some questions. Stop thinking that you know everything that there is to know because you read some report. You don't know. If you're not a part of that community, you don't know. Right? And you have to learn the nuance. And that's true for any community. If I was recently down in Brownsville, Texas, my father recently moved down there. I was down there having some business conversations with some small business owners, and they're asking me, PR and marketing questions. And I could only give them sort of shallow answers. And I had to tell them, I don't know this community the way that I know certain other communities. So in order to really give you some pointers or to understand how to specifically achieve your goal, I need some time to do an analysis. I have to sit down and talk to a few people and do a competitive analysis and understand how people move here. Everybody moves different. The culture is different in a place like Brownsville than it is like in Denver or in San Francisco or in New York. And you have to move the way those people move if you want them to recognize you.
Exactly. Yeah. That's very wise on your part, not just to give advice without having done a little bit of research first. So I admire you for that.
Thanks. I think people get frustrated because it takes time to do that level of work, but that's what is required. If you're going to put, if you're a company and you're going to put money into any type of campaign, why would you not just take the time to do it right the first time? Instead of saying, right, well, we've decided there's $10,000 for this. So take the $10,000, do your best, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
You wouldn't do that with anything else. You would say, okay, let's think through this. How do we maximize our ROI? How do we make sure that we have the right people at the table? You need to do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to continue this conversation in just a moment, but first we're going to hear from our sponsors at Pitchcraft. And Pitchcraft is a community with memberships for PR people to learn how to do better media pitching. So we're going to hear from Kelsey and Derek Ogletree, and then we'll be back with more from Tangia.
My name is Kelsey Ogletree.
I'm Derek Ogletree.
And we co-founded Pitchcraft to put the relationships back in public relations. I've been a journalist for about 10 years now and was laid off from my job as an editor in 2017. I decided to take the plunge into freelance writing, and really what I noticed starting in 2020 is that public relations professionals started scrambling to really figure out how to pitch stories to writers and editors during the pandemic. So that's when we really started developing the concept for Pitchcraft, which is a month-to-month membership platform really focused on helping public relations professionals build those relationships with independent journalists and editors. By joining Pitchcraft, you could save hours of research time week to week. You'll get the opportunity to personally get to know a new freelance writer every week, the opportunity to interface with editors and writers live in monthly pop-up discussions, the chance to build community with the rest of our members in weekly calls, access to e-commerce and affiliate resources, a master pitching calendar, and more. We'd love to show you how Pitchcraft can become an essential part of your PR toolkit. If you like the sound of that, book a demo with us today.
This episode is powered by Pitchcraft. Pitchcraft has been generous enough to share a discount code to share with you. If you use code PR Maven in all caps at checkout, you will get $200 off your first month. There is a link in the show notes. Welcome back. And today we're talking with Tangia Al-awaji Estrada on the PR Maven podcast. So Tangia, how do you integrate your passion for empowering underrepresented communities into your work?
Sure. I think it's in my nature to always root for the underdog. And so I focus on small businesses and nonprofits and thought leaders that maybe think of themselves as the underdog. Those are the folks that I want to work with. And I've incorporated the branding and the PR as the vehicle for connecting the dots between those folks, between their businesses and their brand and their audience, so that they can grow and stand out from the crowd. Whatever they're doing in the world, it's probably a crowded marketplace, right? There's so much noise now on the internet and around us that you have to figure out how you are going to stand out, how you're going to have something unique, even if it's the smallest thing. So I love using my skills to bring businesses forward and say, all right, how do we make a scene for you? What is so unique about you that we're just going to scream it out? That's what I love to do because I root for the underdog. I'm the one that wants to see the person come from way behind and win that race.
Well, I think a lot of journalists do as well. So I think
Yes.
if you're trying to promote an underdog organization or an underdog person, I feel like if you have the correct way of telling the story and pitching the story, you're going to find a journalist who wants to help that person as well.
Yes. I mean, I find that works fairly often is if you can put a story around somebody that, of course, is true, right? It's factual. This, in fact, did happen. You're not making things up. It is much more compelling to be able to show how they've been able to overcome some things, how they are maybe the underdog, but have something really amazing and unique, refreshing to offer. That is a compelling story. That is something that people want to hear about. And so it does make the pitch sometimes a little bit easier.
Exactly. So PR essentially can help elevating diverse voices through storytelling. And that's what you do? Is that right?
Sure. I think of PR as the storytelling arm of any campaign that you're doing, any project that you're doing. And I think of brand as the foundation. It's the who you are. It's what drives your work. It's what compels you to do what you do. And I find that with startup entrepreneurs, sort of newer business owners, sometimes with nonprofits, is they struggle with that piece of understanding what are the foundational pieces that I need to have in my business in order to grow. I mostly work with business owners that have been in business for at least a couple of years. So they've found some success and they've gotten to a point that they're ready to grow and they don't know how to get there. They don't know how to bring those pieces together. And they will sometimes end up with me because they already went to a PR or a marketing firm and that foundational work wasn't done with them. They just said, oh, we're going to do some new creative for you. We're going to update your logo and your website and your colors. And we're going to do an ad campaign. And they're, $10,000 down the road and nothing has changed. Well, I'm sorry, but you need to stop asking for logos because no one cares about your logo. No one cares. They care about how you are connecting to them. What is the problem that you're solving? How are you making their life better or easier in some way? Those are some of the foundational pieces that are brand, that tell you who you are and help you develop your voice and messaging. And if you have not done that work, the PR stuff is not going to be successful, or it's going to take you a million years to get there. So I tell business owners, folks that are trying to grow, they'll often say, I've sent out pitches. I'm trying to connect with media. Nobody is paying attention. Okay, well, you have a branding problem then. Fix the brands. And then you'll know what your story is. And people will be interested in that. But until you fix your brand, until you build the foundation, all this PR stuff, all these pitches, no one cares. You know what's happening to all those pitches? Delete.
Absolutely. So where does storytelling fit in with branding?
It's the story of where you came from. Why did you start? Why are you doing this? You mentioned BIPOC Podcast Creators, as I'm a co-founder of that. And BIPOC Podcast Creators is twofold. So it's, on one hand, it's a community of creators globally that come together to support each other and build a legacy in the podcasting industry. And on the other side, it's consulting, working with media companies to deepen multicultural engagement and launch shows specifically targeted to a multicultural community. Okay, so why does any of that matter? Well, we got here because my co-founder and I, Maribel, went to a podcasting conference. And there was this networking event at the podcast conference for creators of color. And so we went to that. And there we are standing in this itty bitty little room that was hot and sweaty because I guess the air condition wasn't working. And everybody's drinking wine, right? And when you drink wine, especially red wine, it makes you sweaty. You get hot. So we're all literally with standing room only, sweating in this room. And it felt awful because we were shoved into a corner of this multi-thousand person conference. And so think of the optics of that. So here we are sweating, we're hot, we're uncomfortable, we're drinking cheap wine, and we're like, why are we being treated like this?
Horrible.
This is not okay.
It's such a horrible image.
That's how it felt. And so we walk out of there and we have this conversation about how bad that was and how we need to make sure that that never happens again. And out of that moment, BIPOC Podcast Creators was born. Now there's a compelling story.
Yes, it is. It came out of a bad box of cheap red wine.
Yes. And it was true and it happened. And I can transport myself there and remember feeling a bead of sweat rolling down the back of my neck. Right. But that's a story someone is interested in because it happened. And we can probably all remember a moment where we're stuffed like sardines into a sweaty little space. And you're like, why am I even here? And we saw the opportunity to do something. And so we created BIPOC Podcast Creators. And now it's a community of over 2,000 creators. We're projected to be at around 3,000 by the end of this year. We have spoken on stages around the world. We just came back from London. We've been to Saudi Arabia. We've consulted with multiple media companies, brands that you know, and are continuing to do so, all because of this one horrible networking experience.
I love that. That's an awesome story. That is so powerful.
And that story is key to our whole entire brand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We built a brand around that story because it was the impetus. It's one of the things that we can say sets us apart because it didn't start as a money-making venture. which there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with starting a business to make money. Like, why would you start a business if you're not going to make money? But it came from a place that was deeper than that. And that's something that people want to know. It helps folks connect to who you are as co-founders, as founders, as a business. And we are in a place in our, I guess, evolution of a society where it's about interest now. Audience follows interest. People have to be interested in you. And when you have a story to tell, it makes people interested in you. We are, at our core, human beings. We desire that connection, right? At our core, we are all storytellers. Before there was written language, there was oral culture building, right? That's the way it happens. And we still do that. Everybody loves a great storyteller. That's why people like comedians so much. They can tell a great story. That's why people like someone like Steven Spielberg so much. He can tell a great story. It's fundamental to the human experience. And so if you're trying to build a brand that doesn't have a story, I'm sorry, but you don't have anything to sell because you don't have the ability to persuade a single person.
Right. And, I mentioned personal branding. Your personal story is what makes you different from everyone else who does the same thing you do as well. So I think you have a very compelling personal brand story.
Thank you.
So is there a book, an app, or a website that has helped you in your career or your life, and how?
A book, an app, or a website. A book that I always recommend, that I have read more than once, and it has been probably the business book that has helped me the most, is called Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So it's a book written by a former FBI negotiator. And it's just been one of the best things I've ever read. And I keep a hard copy in my office so that I can come back to it again and again and again. It's made me a better negotiator by helping me understand how to build better connections with people.
Nice. That's a good recommendation. Thank you. I'll have to check that one out.
Love that one, Chris Voss. And he does like a whole training series that I'd love to do sometime, but it's pretty in depth and I don't know when I'm gonna have time to do that. But the book is worth, every penny. I would say read that book.
Cool. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect?
You can find me via my website, tangiarenee.com. My contact information is there. You're welcome to send me an email, tangia@tangiarenee.com. If you're interested in BIPOC Podcast Creators, just head over to BIPOCpodcastcreators.com, and all the same information is over there as well. I'm pretty easy to get to. You can find me on all the social media at Tangia Renee. I mostly use LinkedIn. Not a big fan of the other socials. But I'm not that difficult to get in touch with.
Well, it's been really fascinating to meet you and talk to you today. And I want to thank you for joining us. And I'm sure everybody in PR Maven Nation has enjoyed hearing your story as well.
Thanks so much, Nancy. It's been a pleasure to be here. As I shared with you before, I have listened to the PR Maven a few times in the past. It is something that stays in my rotation. And when I have time to fit something in, I do that. So keep up the good work. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much. This episode is powered by Pitchcraft. Pitchcraft has been generous enough to share a discount code to share with you. If you use code PR Maven in all caps at checkout, you will get $200 off your first month. There is a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the Skills and Games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.